Andy Thomson is a staff psychiatrist for students at the University of Virginia. He also has a private practice in adult and forensic psychiatry. He has expertise in the field of evolutionary psychology and suicide terrorism. He is the author of 2 very insightful books, Why We Believe in God's a Concise Guide to the Science of Faith. He has a second book called Facing Bipolar, The Young Adult's Guide to Dealing with Bipolar Disorder, which he co-authored with Dr. Russ Fetterman. That really gives lay people an excellent guide if you're going through this or a family member is going through it. It's not written just as an academic treatise, it's for you to understand, or a person with bipolar to understand what they're facing and how to get through it. Dr. Thomson also happens to be one of the most humble and accessible people that you're likely to meet, despite his numerous publications, a very deep fund of knowledge, his status as a trustee of the Richard Dawkins Foundation and an international speaker. So you're probably wondering, why is he here with us today? If we can go to the next. So I was going to do this as with friends like these, who needs enemies? So this started where I had just a great idea. If you follow this cartoon through, I don't know how easy that is to read. These are some of the things that Andy's going to address today, where, I think I know what's going on inside his head. He worries that he knows what's going on inside my head. I'm going to bug him again. So that he's going to talk about the theory of mind and how we really have evolved to be expert mind readers in a very literal sense. The middle part is a phone there, which I hope if you use a little imagination, you can see a couple of eyes at the end of the receivers, a nose in the middle, and then a mouth at the bottom, making a snarky remark. He's going to talk about that too, how we're programmed to detect patterns, how we're going to see faces in the clouds or in the mountains or wherever, and how that ties into religion and how it's used by religion. And then finally, I'm not sure if we'll address this directly, but with language, it's something we use to communicate, but it's also something we use to manipulate other people. So you can start with a little pleasantry and then convince him that, hey, Andy, you should drive, all these events. But anyway, we really do appreciate it. Andy's a wonderful speaker. I bring him to the stage, give him a warm hand. Thank you.
On the dogmas of religion, as distinguished from moral principles, all mankind, from the beginning of the world to the present day, have been fighting, quarreling, burning, and torturing one another over abstractions unintelligible to themselves and to all others, and absolutely beyond the comprehension of the human mind. Thomas Jefferson wrote those words in 1816. And the essence of my talk this afternoon is this, that should you run into Mr. Jefferson next week, you could say to him, "No, Mr. President, religion is no longer beyond the comprehension of the human mind. In point of fact, we have a basic psychological science of religious belief. We know how and why human minds generate religious beliefs, the mechanisms we use, why we're all vulnerable to generate those beliefs, spread them, and accept them ourselves. Not only that, Mr. President, but when you wrote those words in 1816, there was a 7-year-old boy in England who would grow up to give us the only workable explanation we have for the design and variety of all life on Earth. And he would give us the only workable explanation we have for the design and architecture of the human mind. And it is out of his discovery that we have learned through the evolutionary cognitive neurosciences the mechanisms by which human minds generate religious beliefs. And of course, that was Charles Darwin. And few people appreciate the full extent of his genius. When he published Origin of the Species, he knew the impact that this would have, not just for understanding the evolution of humans, but of their minds. And it's out of that understanding that we now have this psychological science of religious belief. And what I want to do today, let me give you a little roadmap. We're going to do the modern Darwinian synthesis as it relates to religious belief, number one, human evolution as it relates to religious belief, Then I'll give you a taste for some of these mechanisms, and then I'm going to ask your indulgence. We're going to do a little experiment all together. Then we're going to finish up talking about the neurobiology of ritual and how that, in a sense, supercharges religious ideas. But before I launch on to the program, I want to thank a number of people. First and foremost, I want to thank you for coming out this afternoon to this. Paul and Walter, I guess maybe Walter is left, for help with this equipment, to the organizations that have set this up and have invited me. I want to thank in particular Rob for the invitation to be here. But beyond that, he joked about it, but I want to thank Rob for being Rob. One of the real joys of getting involved in the secular movement has been the people I have met. And when I say thanking Rob for being Rob, what I mean is things like this. I don't think there's been a single email from Rob that I haven't learned something, and I really appreciate that. I also want to thank, I wouldn't be here were it not for Richard Dawkins, the opportunity to work with his foundation and the people in his foundation, and my co-author, Claire Alcafer. So let's begin. This is one of the best statements, one of the best summary statements of the modern Darwinian synthesis. Every organism, every plant, bacteria, everything including us, every organism is this integrated collection of problem-solving devices, adaptations, which were designed by natural selection over evolutionary time to promote the reproduction of the genes that built those adaptations. So my heart solves the problem of pumping blood. My lungs solve the problem of extracting oxygen from the air. Hemoglobin solves the problem of transporting that oxygen. At every single level of biological inquiry, Darwinian natural selection. But this is also a statement of the human mind. The mind is what the brain does, and the brain is this integrated collection of problem-solving devices, adaptations designed over evolutionary time by natural selection to promote the survival of the genes that built those adaptations. You're sitting there looking at me. I'm an upside-down, two-dimensional image on your retina. And there are myriad adaptations which convert that into the three-dimensional view you have. But also, you have social adaptations that solve very specific problems that are humming along, and you're not conscious of most of them. And those are the ones, those social adaptations, that go into religious belief. You don't know it, but you are making judgments about me and my character based on my face, my eyes, the tone of my voice. You are constantly thinking about what my wishes, beliefs, and desires are, and trying to match them with your own. Very specific adaptations. And those are the ones, you're using them, you're going to be using them the whole time I speak. And those are the ones that actually are utilized or pulled out and go into religious beliefs. And another way of thinking about this is that the human mind is like the Apollo spacecraft. What's the Apollo spacecraft? It's this compact array of engineering devices that are solving a constant stream of problems, only a few of which are made actually conscious to the astronaut. That's the modern Darwinian synthesis. And those adaptations, as I said, those social adaptations, I hope to show you, everyday, ordinary adaptations are what go in to build religious belief. Now let's look at human evolution. We now know, and Darwin knew it, that we are not fallen angels, we're risen apes. And Darwin knew this at the time that he wrote Origin of the Species. But he waited until 1871, Descent of Man, before he put in print his idea, which was correct, that we arose from apes in Africa. And whenever somebody says, where do you come from now on, think about answering them by saying, Africa. In a sense, we're all African Americans. What is remarkable is that every single one of the 7 billion people on the earth today, all 7 billion of us, are the descendants of maybe somewhere between 600 and 2,000 individuals that lived in Africa about 70,000 years ago. And if you look at if you know where sort of Somalia is down to Mozambique, the Great Rift Valley, you want to think of that as the birth canal of the human species. Africa has our bones, Africa is in our blood, we're all Africans, and it is our evolution in Africa and surviving that, and particularly learning to be with each other. It is the mechanisms that went into that go into religious belief. Next time you go to your family physician and he says, can you give me your family history? This is what you want to give him, right? Or give him or her. This is your family history. This is 5 million years of hominid evolution. The chimp-bonobo line is already split off. So this is your family history. And if your physician says, no, come on, I just want your immediate family history, you say to him, okay, and you give him this, right? This is our genus Homo, what we know about Homo. And the relevance of this is that the mechanisms that I'm going to be talking about evolved not in 19th century Vienna. It is very hard for us to get our minds truly around the time scales involved. We can emotionally conceive of maybe 3 or 4 generations. It is much more difficult to conceive of 2 million years just of our genus. One illustration I like is the following. Imagine that today, starting at midnight, November 15th was 2 million years, 2.5 million years. So every hour is about 100,000 years. At midnight last night, Homo comes on the scene, right? Homo habilis. At dawn this morning, a few of them made it out of Africa. Around lunchtime today, some of them made it into Europe. These are small kin-based hunter-gatherer groups of our genus Homo, right? About dinner time tonight, our immediate ancestor, Homo heidelbergensis, shows up in Africa. At about 9 o'clock tonight, they show up about dinner time tonight, and some of them leave Africa into Europe. By 9 o'clock tonight, the ones that went into Europe have become Neanderthals. By 10 o'clock tonight, the ones that remained in Africa, a branch of them have become us, anatomically modern human beings. Right? 10 o'clock tonight. At 11:20, we leave Africa. By 11:45, Neanderthals who lived from Spain to the Siberia, they're gone. It is not until 6 minutes before midnight that we start moving away from the hunter-gatherer lifestyle and settling into agricultural communities. So, what makes us unique? Look at the front part of the brain. Right? It is our frontal lobes. This is what makes us uniquely human. This is where our social adaptations reside. And trying to figure out who's doing what with whom, basically. But we are a deeply social species, and it is these mechanisms, largely probably in the frontal lobe, as we'll see, that go into crucial aspects of religious belief. The other thing that makes us different from, say, our chimpanzee ancestors and probably many of our hominid ancestors is that we achieve eusociality, which we think of as insects. So we're sort of, socially a hominid insect, meaning what? We achieved eusociality, which is multi-generational care of the young, cooperative care of the young. A chimpanzee mother won't even give her infant to her sister. Okay? And so we have multi-generational care, cooperative care, division of labor, defensive communes. We are the most cooperative species on Earth, and it's probably what is why we're so successful. And it's those mechanisms that go into our sociality and our cooperation which are utilized for religion. Another way of thinking about who we are and where we came from is that most of life, even as modern human beings, most of our evolutionary history is an endless camping trip with extended relatives. Right? That's the circumstances which we evolved, that shaped us. Right? Okay, So all your religious ideas are byproducts of these cognitive social mechanisms that were originally designed for other purposes. And in a sense, religious ideas are an artifact of our ability to imagine other social worlds. They're all human mental concepts with some alteration. Now, most people think byproduct, well, how could a byproduct be so powerful like religion? Reading and writing is a byproduct. Reading and writing is a byproduct of mechanisms, vision, fine motor skill, and language that are biologic mechanisms that originally evolved for other purposes. We combine them in this powerful cultural creation of reading and writing, and who among us would say that reading and writing is not an extraordinarily powerful creation that has shaped us? And similarly, religion is the same. This byproduct of mechanisms originally for other purposes, which come together and create powerful religious beliefs. This is obviously a photograph of Pentecostal worshipers. Let me just illustrate this. I'll try to put this. What does a 2-year-old do when a 2-year-old is distressed? All right? Anybody been around a 2-year-old recently, or one, or they've got mobility, they can walk, okay? And what do they do when they're distressed? They come over to you and they say, "Pick me up," right? That's your basic mammalian attachment mechanism. And what do? You don't even think about it. You pick up the signal and you pick that child up, right? As a parent, a caregiver, right? That's your fundamental mammalian primate attachment system, right? Well, the attachment system is one of the ones very powerful in religion. Here are your Pentecostal worshipers reaching up to a super parent, more powerful than any ordinary human parent, and saying, "Help me, take care of me." It's your basic attachment mechanism. Now, and people feel like I'm being offensive. I'm trying to illustrate something here. The basic psychology of religion is the same psychology as junk food, right? All of us, how many of you at times crave a Big Mac meal? Sure, okay? And why? Because a Big Mac meal is a cultural creation. It's a modern creation that arises from ancient adaptations, but is combined in a way that comes back at us with a supernormal stimulus, right? Just like those Pentecostal worshipers are reaching up to a powerful God, a powerful parent, a supernormal parent. Similarly, all of us have cravings for sweets, but the original sweet was ripe fruit, right? And so we get Coca-Cola. Or the illustration I like is, how many of you at 3 a.m. in the morning, if you wake up and you know that there's still a brownie downstairs, how many of you all will go for it, right? Okay. All right. Now, how many of you, when you wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning, if you know a peach is downstairs, is going to go downstairs for the peach? Right? No, of course not. Because that brownie is a supernormal stimulus that, in a sense, hijacks or utilizes your craving for sweets. And your dopamine neurons light up, and it's just wonderful. And we have cravings for fat, but it's originally the fat of lean game meat, which was a crucial source of calories and proteins. So junk food is this cultural creation that comes from these adaptations, but then comes back at it with a supernormal stimulus. Right? And that's what religion is. It is a byproduct of mechanisms originally designed for other purposes, this cultural creation that arises from them, then comes back with supernormal stimuli. And one of the lessons of this is that, as crazy appearing as some religious ideas are, I hope one of the things I want you to take away from this is that any religious idea or belief is just one small step from an everyday cognitive mechanism that you are probably using right now. So, let me give you just one more, really. One of them is this called decoupled cognition, which is a fancy term for the following. We can decouple our cognition in time and place, and what that means is I can guarantee you that everybody in this room has been listening to me attentively and at the same time, at moments, thinking about a conversation they have to have later today or next week with a boss or a family member, or maybe you've remembered a conversation you had with somebody that you're sort of still worried about. God, did I say that? Jeez. You know, and what you've done is you've been able to decouple your cognition from the present moment and go to another place and time, either in the back or future, and you've been able to have a complicated social interaction in your mind, right? You know, a few people smiled when I said, if you run into Mr. Jefferson this week, but nobody said, huh, what, whoa, whoa, you know, because all of us can instantly imagine it. If I ask you to imagine a conversation with Mr. Jefferson on Broad Street, you can do it easily. If I ask you to imagine a conversation with President Obama, you can do it very easily. And I can ask you to imagine a conversation with President Obama where you ask him something and promise to give him something in return. Right? So, a very powerful other, you're making a request, you hope for something in return, reciprocity. That's prayer. Prayer to an authority figure who you are approaching. I hope you're starting to see how it is just one small step to ancestor worship. You know, we can, and I don't know about you all, but I'm getting to the age where I've lost a lot of those near and dear to me. And I find myself at moments still talking to them, right? And I hope you wouldn't lock me up for that because, you know, I think most of us do. We'll catch ourselves still talking to those that we've lost. And so, again, it's just this basic mechanism that is what makes us, part of our human uniqueness is this decoupled cognition. Now there's another part of this that is more anatomical, which is this. And I'm going to do a little surgery here. Imagine, okay, for a moment that this is your brain. Right? This is your brain, the outer layer, the cortex of your brain. And surgery. I don't want to ruin any. Well, let me see. Okay. All right. So this is your brain, right? And we're going to look at the right hemisphere of your brain. And this part here is the midline of your frontal lobe, right? And what's important about this is that in the midline of your frontal lobe is where you process your own thoughts and feelings and desires. You know, what you're thinking about my presentation, you're processing right here. What you think and how you're feeling and how you feel about others and what others might be feeling or thinking, all that's going on right here, right? And whereas, with regards to I want you to think about your right ankle right now. Where's your right ankle, right? Okay, you're processing, think about your left ankle. Okay, forgot my basic anatomy. Think about your left ankle. All right, you're processing your left ankle. You're feeling that position of your left ankle and moving it in the outer cortex, right? In the right motor strip on the outer cortex. And if you look at my left ankle, you're processing my body in that same area. Now you can reasonably say, why is he going on about this? Well, here's the thing. Dualism, the fact that we experience mind and body as separate, is built into our very neuroanatomy, the architecture of our brain. We experience and believe that minds and bodies are separate, right? They're discrete categories, even though they're clearly not. But we automatically experience them as separate. It's the default setting of the human mind. So if I had to have Rob literally in front of me to think about what's going on in his mind, that would be very cumbersome. I can think about what's going on in the mind of somebody I haven't even met. I have an evaluation tomorrow of a very complicated person who I've not met. I know some things about the individual, and I can already, start to think about that person. We do that automatically. It's an extraordinary piece of cognitive software, and it is crucial to what makes us human. It's crucial to religious belief. So I can think about what God wants, what He desires, what or she, I can start imagining that. And this is, I'm hoping you're starting to see, this is what makes it very easy for us to think about a soul that lives on beyond the body. It's what allows us to think about, create the ideas of heaven or hell, where people, i.e. minds, continue to exist. This is one of the earliest burial sites of our species in what is today Israel, about 90,000 years old, and there's some antler horns that were put with this adolescent who died. So there is clearly a burial and some thought of this adolescent in an afterlife, someplace, continuing to live on. So the whole notion of souls and heavens and afterlife is just one small step from our everyday, ordinary cognitions. I love this, the modern version of it. Pop-up's in the cloud now, sweetheart. But again, going to a place where, Grandpa lives on. All right, so those are some of I hope you're getting a taste for some of the cognitive mechanisms. And they're things like the attachment system, decoupled cognition, theory of mind, our mechanisms for kinship. Well, we have at least 20 cognitive mechanisms that go into religious belief. Now, I want to turn to what supercharges them, and that is ritual. And I would like for some volunteers. And does anybody have a birthday coming up this week? Would you mind volunteering? Okay, I need one more birthday person maybe this month. Anybody got a birthday next week? The following week? Anybody got a birthday? Okay, great, come on up. All right. Now, thank you, Paul. And you are? Doug. Thank you for volunteering. Okay, so we have Doug and Paul. Now, I'm going to ask all of you to stand up. And here's what I'd like you to do. First of all, get a sense of how you are feeling. Just do a gut sense of your internal feeling state. Just how are you feeling at this moment? Okay, try to hold on to that. How are you feeling at this moment? Secondly, think about somebody you care about, who you're in conflict with, where there's real tension now. How do you feel about that person? Try to call it up in your mind. How do you feel about that person? Try to hold on to it. Third and last, and it's simple, I want you to take the skin on the back of your hand and crank down on it and try to make it hurt as much as you can. Make it hurt as much as you possibly can. Okay. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is everybody put your arm around the person next to you. All right. And then we're going to start swaying symmetrically back and forth, and then we're going to belt out 2 verses of Happy Birthday. First to Paul, and then to Doug. All right? All right, so let's get the sway going. All right? Let's get the sway, really get it moving, Let's get a good swaying going. All right, here we go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Paul. Happy birthday to you. Belt it out now. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Doug. Happy birthday to you. Give him a round of applause. All right. Now, let's do it in reverse order. Pinch your skin. Anybody notice a difference?
For me, it's more effort.
Take more to get to that level? Can anybody achieve a previous level of pain? Okay. How many of you noticed some change? Okay. Okay, second one. How are you feeling about that person you're in conflict with? Warmer? Somebody feel more? Okay. Anybody feeling more annoyed with the person? Yes, sir. Okay, one. We got one. Okay. In any species, there's variation. Remember that. Right? Okay. How many felt a little, feeling a little bit warmer, a little bit nicer towards the person? All right? Okay. Now, if you can get around your self-consciousness, what's your basic emotional state like? Anybody notice any changes? Calmer, okay. Anybody notice any other changes?
Happier.
Happier. Happier? Okay, calmer, happier. Did anybody feel worse after doing it? All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Let's give them another hand. All right. Now, what we're now going to do and finish up the talk is to dissect that. What you just saw was the basics of religious ritual and harnessing certain neurotransmitters, right? And think about it. We just did a few minutes of singing Happy Birthday, right? What's fascinating is, and here, look at Nicholas Wade, the science correspondent for the New York Times, his book, The Faith Instinct. He lays out a powerful case of the following, that if you look at the three populations that are closest to our original ancestors, the Thomson in Africa, the Andaman Islanders, and the Aborigines, what you see is an identical religion. Right? And he argues, I think persuasively, that what we are seeing is a window into the original religion of our hunter-gatherer ancestors, at least going back 70,000 years in Africa. They carried it out of Africa with them. It's still almost identical in these three tribes, which are the closest we have to our original Homo sapiens ancestors in Africa. And it is all song, dance, and trance. Almost identical, with a lot of physical movement, touch, and making a lot of music. And that in this first religion, there are no priests or ecclesiastical authority, whole communities, any rank is dissolved, and it is centered on this rhythmic physical activity. And we did it for a few moments. Imagine doing it through an entire night, right? 8, 12 hours. And what they discovered was the following. They basically harnessed crucial neurotransmitters. Serotonin, the original monoamine neurotransmitter, this is what we boost with Prozac. Serotonin, when you go out and do physical exercise, that's serotonin. You're boosting serotonin. Serotonin is involved in self-esteem. Serotonin is involved in outward focus. In other words, if you're internally ruminating and you boost your serotonin, you're thinking outward about others. Norepinephrine, it's involved in memory, attention, excitement, and particularly memory, marking things as memorable. Everybody's heard of dopamine, the pleasure chemical, but dopamine is far more powerful than that. Dopamine gives us motivation, attention, it marks salience. The things that you remember from my talk today will be marked by dopamine, right? And all those are boosted by rhythmic physical activity, strenuous physical activity, getting your heart rate up. Everybody's heard of oxytocin, the trust hormone. That gets boosted, particularly gets boosted with touch, right? So when you are touching each other, accepted or wanted touch, you get a hit of oxytocin. So right now, if you just reach over and put your hand on your partner's shoulder, they're going to get a hit of oxytocin. They're also going to get a hit of endorphins. Everybody thinks of endorphins as the chemical that blocks pain. It does. And that's what you noticed when you couldn't get the pain. We gave you, just in that brief period of time, a real hit of endorphins with the touch, but also making music, not listening to music, but making music boosts endorphins. And endorphins are crucial for social bonding. particularly endorphins and oxytocin. They're what go into social bonding. And Darwin knew that music was powerful, and he thought music was an adaptation. And it was one of the things crucial to courtship, advertisement. But we now know that making music is a huge booster of endorphins, and it's bonding. You know, if we sing together, we bond together. The rhythmic movement. Two experiments. One took, anybody here a rower? All right, gentleman in the back. If we were to put that gentleman on an ergometer, right, the rowing machine, and have him row at a constant rate so we can measure his output. We know, keep the work output, you know, we can measure it exactly. And we have him row for 20 minutes on the ergometer. And then we test his pain thresholds. And there's one test with a blood pressure cuff that does it. We test his pain thresholds, and it's there. Then we have him on an ergometer, and anybody else here a rower? Anybody else? Okay. Well, let's say Rob's a rower. Okay. So we have him on the ergometer, and we just have Rob on an ergometer next to him. They're not touching. All they're doing is just rowing simultaneously together, right? And we can control for work output. Then we test his pain threshold. His pain threshold's gone way up. No difference in work output. Just rowing sequentially with somebody else. Even more interesting, I think. So he's getting, getting a huge boost in endorphins, enough that we're changing a pain threshold. Right? No difference in work output. If we take this room and we divide you into two random groups, and we ask the first group to just walk around the building 3 times. That's all. And then we ask the other group to walk around the building 3 times in lockstep. In other words, march around the building 3 times, just in lockstep. Have you come back and do what are called economic trust games. And the only difference is lockstep, walking around. Right? Symmetrical movement. The group that marched around will trust each other in the group much better. An elevated sense of trust. And the only variable is walking around in symmetrical movement. Right? So, what do militaries do? They do a lot of marching. It's a lot of bonding, a lot of trust, right? Touch. And I'd encourage you, there's a great article in the New York Times called "A Little Bit of Touch Means So Much," which reviews some of the literature on this. And touch is a much more powerful mechanism than we appreciate it. And let me go back to this. Let's see. I'll do this. Okay. If we were, let me see. I'm just going to pick on somebody here. The woman here in the gray sweater sitting next to her partner, right? Just, you can stand. Let's say we put her in an imaging machine, right? And she's lying in the imaging machine, and we show her a threat scenario, right? Her amygdala, the fear part of her brain, is going to explode. Right? Then we have her in the imaging machine, and she's holding my hand, and I'm a stranger to her. Show her a threat scenario, and her amygdala doesn't light up as much. Right? Only variable is holding a stranger's hand. Right? Now, she holds the hand of her partner in the third trial. She's in the imaging machine. We show her another threat scenario, and her amygdala almost doesn't light up at all. And not only that, the degree to which her amygdala does not light up is directly proportional to her rating of the quality of the relationship. Right? It is that powerful. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. So touch, again, is much, much more powerful than we realize. So what did we do? I had you up here. We were doing symmetrical movement together. We were touching, and it was probably experienced as acceptable touch. and we were making music, right? And so we were boosting, in that brief period of time, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. We were probably also boosting our internal cannabinoids. We were boosting oxytocin, and we were really getting a hit of endorphins, right? All of which go into memory, salience, but particularly bonding, right? Religion comes from the word religare, to bond. Now, sometimes when I do this, there's some people who feel uncomfortable and they don't participate, right? They're still getting the same boost. Not as much, but we have mirror neurons. You know, you watch me raise my right arm, the same neurons in your brain that raise your right arm are lighting up right now. Your frontal lobe is suppressing it, but internally they're lighting up. So when you see these powerful rituals, even if you're not participating in them, you feel it at some level. How many of you remember when former President Clinton gave the nominating speech, or the speech on behalf of President Obama at the Democratic Convention? How many of you remember seeing that, right? And if you remember, Clinton gave just an extraordinary speech, I thought. And then when he finishes, President Obama walks on the stage, walks over towards him. Clinton bows, kind of an act of submission. And then the two men embrace. And Obama is rubbing his shoulders like crazy. And you can see Clinton start to tear up. How many of you remember watching it and feeling it yourself? Right? Yeah, okay. That's mirror neurons. Now, you may not remember, but these two men hated each other. There's an article in the New Yorker about the war between these two men, and getting them to reconcile was like the Oslo Accords. I mean, it was really hard. It's a fascinating article in the New Yorker about the real visceral dislike each man had for the other. And you could see that reconciliation. And what was going on was a ritual. And one of the crucial parts of that ritual was touch. And all of us watching it, right? And we felt it. So, rituals are extraordinarily powerful, and they're cultural creations that, in a sense, hijacked or utilize our neurochemistry to deal with the crucial problems of social living, remember, in harsh, dangerous environments. Freeloaders, it was a way of creating punishment. It's a way of commitment to the group, hard to fake, costly signaling for commitment. Courtship, you know, if you remember that picture I showed you of the Kung San, the men are circling the women. You know, and the women are, it's a courtship display. The women are seeing who's committed to the group and making courtship judgments. Ease communal conflict, territorial defense. Think of the rituals that certain groups go towards that signal us, right? You know, when we see the armies marching across Red Square, that's a ritual that's a pretty strong signal, right? So there's signal of the identity of the group, it's powerful, and also, obviously, rituals prepare men for war. And anybody who served in the military knows this. What do we see in the earliest paintings of our species? We don't see two people talking to each other over a cup of coffee. What we see are paintings of religious rituals. And how many of you are familiar, have seen anything about this discovery in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe? Anybody? This is fascinating. One of the mysteries is, what led us as hunter-gatherers to shift to agriculture? What led us to settle into agricultural communities? And this was discovered, and what it is it's a place where people gathered. It was clearly religious, and they think it's one of the places where we gathered as we were still hunter-gatherers. There's no agricultural communities anywhere in sight, but we would gather at these central places, and this may be a window into, 11, 12,000 years ago. And what happens when we have to start living with non-kin? We have to find ways of bonding with non-kin. One of those aspects is religion. and moralizing gods that are looking over us and looking at us and watching our behavior. That helps solve the problems of groups coming together as non-kin and trying to create cooperative groups where it's not your relatives. The other interesting thing about this is that it contained these huge vats where it appears they brewed beer, right? And 160 liter vats, and the evidence is that they brewed beer. And anybody want to guess, what is of those neurotransmitters I showed you, what's one of the main ones that alcohol triggers? Anybody want to guess? Dopamine's one. We feel good when we drink. Endorphins. When you drink alcohol, you get endorphins, bonding, okay? So we moved towards agricultural communities. We had problems. We had to find problems to solve of how do we create cooperation with non-kin, moralizing gods, and beer, right? And so when your Baptists tell you that when the Baptists tell you that drinking is sinful, you can tell them that not drinking is anti-religious, right? And here's where it gets even more interesting. The assumption has been that we settled into communities to raise grains for bread for food. May not be. We may owe civilization to beer. We may have settled into communities to raise barley or barley-like grains for beer, and the original bread that we made as human beings, the original bread was a way of storing the barley to use later for fermentation for beer, right? So we may owe civilization to religion and beer, right? All right. And here's from one of the monuments there, you can see the people I hope you can see the people dancing. So, in conclusion, whenever you see this, I want you to think of it as a dance, right? Symmetric movement, touch it. This is a dance. And not only that, it is an echo of our original religion as hunter-gatherers in Africa. If you look at all of our religions, they are all distant echoes of that original religion. You know? Buddhists. Anybody been to the Wailing Wall? The men symmetrically moving, davening, and in a sense making music with the chant. And again, if you look at all religions, again, you will see this, it's a window into deep history, and they all contain elements of that original hunter-gatherer religion that we can see in such tribes as the Thomson and the Andaman Islanders. And of course, Christianity. Now, anybody here know why pews are in churches? They went in about, I think, the 14th or 15th century. Anybody know why pews are put in churches?
I read your book, so I know. So they wouldn't dance.
Right, stop the dancing. And thank you for reading the book. Right. But that's why pews were put in Christian churches. This is stop the dancing. So what did we do? We went outside the churches and we created carnival. Can you all read the caption? It says, "I wish you would make up your mind, Mr. Dickens. Was it the best of times or was it the worst of times? It could scarcely have been both." Right. And this is my conclusion. Mr. Dickens was right. All right? It is the worst of times. It is the best of times. It is the worst of times because all you have to do is turn on your television. All you have to do is think about what happened in Paris. Right? The murderousness, the savagery, still caused by religion. It's there. Lest we focus on the murderous Muslims. No, we also have opposition to stem cell research, the limitless possibility of stem cell research. which is religiously motivated. And what I'd submit to you is that it is the worst of times in that religion is probably one of, if not the main barrier to a global civil society. So it is, in many ways, still the worst of times. But if I have done my work well this afternoon, I hope I have shown you it is also the best of times. We are the first generation in the history of mankind, the first generation that now knows why and how human minds generate religious beliefs. We have that basic psychological science. It's now known. And I think that leaves us with three challenges. First, what am I going to do with that knowledge? Secondly, what are you going to do with this knowledge? And thirdly, and most importantly, what are we, as scientifically literate societies, democratic, scientifically literate societies in the 21st century, what are we going to do with that knowledge for the next generations? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Andy, thank you for a spectacular talk. I think the main take-home point for my wife there was when I sneaked down at 3 o'clock for a brownie. That's evolution, not a failing. We're now going to have Lisa and Andrew have a conversation for a little bit. Allie, you out there? Can you grab the microphone? So she's going to go through some questions. We have a short video from Peter Boghossian that Andy's going to respond to. And then if you have a question, just raise your hand. We'll come around with the microphone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you.
So the first question I have has to do with something that I actually read in the preface of your book, where you said that the book arose as an echo of 9/11. And I wanted to know if you could tell us a little bit about how that event was a catalyst for writing the book.
Certainly. On 9/11, my son was in the building next to the World Trade Center. And he witnessed it all, and obviously came within a few hundred yards of something tragic happening to him. And that unsettled me terribly, and I started researching suicide terrorism. And one of the things I found, and this is back at 9/11, even then, there was a very good literature already out there on how human minds generate religious belief. I was stunned. And you already had people like Pascal Boyer, and you had researchers out there who had used the evolutionary cognitive neurosciences to start to lay out the anatomy of religious belief. And my reaction was, my God, I mean, this stuff is here. I mean, how come people don't know this? And it led to what was a formulation about the dynamics, the psychological dynamics of suicide terrorism that was published, and I got a lot of nice feedback on it. And then it ultimately led to writing the book. So, but it was, excuse me, obviously it's still touchy. But it was still that 9/11 that catalyzed me, and I see stuff like happened in Paris, and it still evokes that, obviously. But I hope, if I've been clear today, we now know, the basic psychological science of religious belief. It's there, and how many people know that? How many of our leaders are bothering to say this? But it's there.
I'd like to show a short video clip
Sure.
from Peter, and I just realized I didn't bring the remote
sure.
with me.
Okay.
Is it over here?
Yeah.
So this is a short video clip from Peter Boghossian, and I think it's about a minute. We'll just watch this, and then I have another question.
Critical thinking and moral reasoning are my passion and my profession. One of the things that I've learned from reading about this, writing about this, publishing and teaching is that critical thinking is as much of an attitude and a disposition as it is a skill set. For example, the attitude of being willing to revise one's beliefs, thinking that if evidence comes in and I rethink my position, is that a good thing to do or a bad thing to do? One of the problems we see with religious indoctrination and even religious instruction is that children in particular are taught that it's a bad thing to do to revise their belief. They're told that they have to believe certain propositions in their faith tradition, and doubt is a type of sin or dangerous, and revision, belief revision, can actually lead them to become worse people.
Just to ask a question on that theme, I'm a parent. Two of my kids are here today, and as a parent, my daughter's right there. And as a parent, I've always encouraged my children to ask questions, to be curious, to think critically, but I find that a lot of parents don't, and in fact, they often try to stop that kind of behavior in their children. So do you think children should be taught to think critically beginning at a young age, or is it more important that they learn their parents' thoughts and values? And then as sort of a second follow-up to that, and if you're in favor of teaching critical thinking to children, what can we as a society do to move in that direction?
Absolutely. I think what we want to do is we want our children, in a psychological sense, never to get older than 3 years old. Think about it, okay? What do 2-year-olds do? They say no. But what do 3-year-olds do? Well, why? Why? You know? And I think that's what we want to do. We want to encourage them to question everything. And we're up against actually a downside of our evolution. We are, as you saw, a eusocial species. That's a hierarchical species. Creating hierarchies is crucial for survival. And all of us are much more vulnerable to authority than any of us realize. This is the meaning of the Stanley Milgram experiments. And that, so we're much too vulnerable to authority, and we have to work hard, I think, to get our children to question everything. And again, here's where there's just beautiful new neuroscience on this. Remember I was showing you the medial frontal lobes? Well, there's an area in our medial frontal lobes that is sort of like the doubt muscle. And there's actually an area of our brain, and it's not particularly strong. But we now know that if you exercise, neurons that fire together wire together. So I think what we're going to see in the coming years is that if we encourage critical thinking in children, if we encourage doubt and questioning, I think somebody's going to do a sequential MRI study showing that area of the brain gets robust. And so yes, I think we have to do it. I know I'm probably getting you in trouble, but I would hope your daughters, question everything. Why? Why? What? Why should I have to do that? Why should I do? But if you think about it, in the harsh, dangerous environments that we evolved in, it would not be good for them as children if you told them, there's a pack of lions coming towards us. We've got to run, and your daughters would be going, "Show me the evidence." I want to see the evidence. Okay. So it was crucial for children. I mean, all of us as children, we have mechanisms that we accept what authorities tell us. That's a mechanism because it was crucial to our survival. But one of the nice things about the modern world is that we can encourage critical thinking and develop that muscle, and our children won't get eaten by a pack of lions.
All right, this next question is actually based on something that Peter Boghossian said, not in that video clip that we just saw, but in a video clip that I'd seen recently. And this is it. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders identifies a disorder that's called delusion disorder, and it classifies that as a mental illness. However, religious delusions are not categorized as mental illness. So, do you feel that they should be categorized as such, or should they be exempt from delusional disorder?
I don't think they should be exempt. And I think if you look at Peter's book, he has a very nice discussion of this issue. But here's where I disagree a little bit with Peter. Because I think what you saw was the American Psychiatric Association, when they wrote DSM-5, they sacrificed scientific accuracy for political correctness. Okay? Because what they could say, and they would be on solid ground, is that religious beliefs are a form of cultural delusion. Right? And we now know the mechanisms. They could have said that and been on solid scientific ground. And so that it's a cultural delusional phenomenon which you can escape from, and you know, you're not going to be damaged. Point of fact, you'll probably be better, right? And if you think of some of the people in the secular world whose work we love, Michael Shermer, Dan Barker. These were proselytizing Christians when they were in their youth, and they gave it up, they moved away from it, and they're wonderful people. So they had a cultural delusional disorder, in a sense, in their youth. And that's different from a clinical delusional disorder, which is serious and I think is a different animal. Let me give you an illustration. Last year I saw somebody in my private practice, a 55-year-old woman with a very responsible job in healthcare and no prior psychiatric history. And she just started thinking that there were people following her. Every time she got in a car, she was convinced that people were following her. And for a while she thought, this is crazy. But then slowly, she actually came to believe it. And she had a difficult time going to work. On the weekends, she would stay at home. Her husband became very worried about her. She had no hallucinations, nothing else. There was nothing to, indicate a further psychotic disorder or schizophrenia, anything like that. She had a circumscribed delusion, right? And was miserable. And it took about a year of antipsychotic medications with side effects, and it slowly went away. But it took about 2 years. And, clearly, I think there was some disturbance in her brain that probably had to do with the networks where we read intention. All of us make guesses about intention. And I think that's clearly different from religious. But I think the American Psychiatric Association betrayed us all by not being honest about what is now known and making that distinction in the manual.
Okay, so I have one more prepared question for you, and then I'll open it up to questions from the audience. For a lot of people, their faith provides a lot of comfort. For example, we'll go to heaven and we'll see our loved ones again. And so sometimes it almost makes it too depressing or frightening to let go of their faith. So for people like that, here's a two-part question. Is there harm in letting people going through life believing in an afterlife? And if it is harmful, how can we sort of frame the benefits of not believing to make it easier to transition away from religious belief?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think you have to do it individual by individual. I think I don't have the wisdom to know what's best for people. I think you want to just. I don't think you're going to argue anybody out of their faith. I don't think it's a good idea. The evidence shows that they just dig in harder. I don't think it's good to believe in an afterlife because you then avoid living in this life. But going back to the attachment mechanism, religious beliefs are very much tied in with attachment to people. So usually for an individual to give up their religious belief, they are moving away from other people. They are risking attachment bonds with loved ones. And you actually see that in Darwin's life. Darwin's wife was a stout believer. He figured everything out when he was 1830. How old would he have been? He figured everything out. He had completely figured out natural selection when he was 29 years of age. And he sat on the idea for 20 years because it would upset him. He knew it would upset his deeply religious wife. And so Darwin had moved away from it, but to get and they had lost children, and his wife was, Emma was the only way she could ease her grief over the loss of particularly one of their daughters at 10, was the idea that she would see them in the afterlife. So even in Darwin's own family, you see how complicated it could be. So I think you have to sort of take it one case at a time.
Okay, I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. We have someone with the microphone over here.
Supposing that you could get naturally competitive religious people together, but rational beings, and they all sat in the same room, and you showed them your slides, and they nodded their heads and said, yeah, I can see that, and I see why we all use rhythm and touch and music and all of that to encourage our people to feel together. Fortunately, we also know that our way is right. It doesn't impact that at all. I mean, their true belief, no matter what they do to get other people to believe in it, is still their true belief. I don't see how it can impact that.
Well, we know that religious belief is very much tied up with identity. The same area of the brain lights up with identity and religious belief. And so when people move away from religious belief, they're moving away from a fundamental identity. And I think what we have to do is to, and people are doing this, is to try to study scientifically what helps people give up religious belief. And I think more and more is known. And I think that will guide us. But I think for me, at least one aspect of it is education, education, education. And the material I presented today is out there. It's in the scientific literature. There's a lot of good evidence that supports it. And I would submit to you that right now, but certainly within the next 10 years, but I would argue obviously right now, you can't have a college introductory psychology textbook that doesn't include this, right? It's just basic, and so I think it's not our generation that is going to change much, but I think it's our obligation to future generations that this is out there, that we teach critical thinking, that we show them what science has now shown us about how and why human minds generate religious belief. But your question, I don't know if I answered your question, sir, but your question reminded me of one of my close friends is a judge. Lovely guy, great judge. And, and he heard about the book, he asked to read it, he read the book, and he sent me a note. He said, I read your book, I really loved it, it's a great book, but I'm still a believer. And I wrote him back and said, well, thank you, Judge Hawkshire. I don't know if that answered your question, but...
I think that it does. I think it does impact, say, somebody deciding about whether to become
Could you use the?
I think it might influence people who are deciding whether they should become religious or not, religious in the traditional sense. But I still don't believe that people, if you educated every single Shia and every single Sunni, whether they would not be at each other's throats the next day. They just know that they still had to keep the music flowing, making sure people went to church, and keep them in their true belief.
Well, maybe, but I'm not so pessimistic. Let me tell you a story that makes me optimistic. So I met this young man in Lynchburg, and I've got to be careful here. And he immigrated from Europe with his family, and they are, hardcore Jerry Falwell, the whole 9 yards with Falwell's empire. And this young man had been proselytizing. I mean, he bought it all, right? And he married somebody in the faith, and all of a sudden he came across some readings, and he started reading, he started thinking on his own and questioning, and it took and I think he was also helped by the internet, and it took him about a year, but he completely changed, completely, and he is now in a terribly, terribly painful situation because he's married to a woman, they have a child, and his wife is still a firm believer. And all his family, I mean, he is smack dab in the middle of the Falwell Empire, right? And, and so I think what we want to know is what are the mechanisms that allowed him to change? I mean, and I've had the privilege of traveling around, giving talks like this and meeting people. And I'm just curious, how many people here were at some point believers, right, okay. So we know that people change. We know that even, and in January we're going to have some people who are, I don't know if they're Sunni or Shiite, but ex-Muslims here. We know that people change. And they give up these, I think, some, frankly, awful beliefs. How do they do that? What's the process? I think we can study it and map it out and document it and utilize it. And that's the kind of stuff Peter does. I mean, so that's also science. That's investigating evidence. That's generating hypotheses. That's testing hypotheses. And so I'm actually optimistic. I think even,
I hope you're right.
Well.
Okay. I think I saw one other question over here towards the back.
Obviously, these adaptations are extremely powerful, and there are people who exploit them for their own power. It's enormously in their best interest. Leaders of countries, leaders of religion, monetarily, control, all of those things. And it seems that without religion, we would need something to fill that vacuum. That maybe these adaptations can be used to form different kinds of groups that are not dependent on an all-powerful being to give us that feeling of connectedness and togetherness.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that's, in a sense, the problem that the secular communities face. We've got to find ways of creating bonding, moral communities. I think that's the task before us. Your question reminded me of something. If you look at, again, Nicholas Wade's book, The Faith Instinct, he has, I think, one of the best discussions about how politics utilized religion and how religion utilized politics and sort of the history of that. What would look like otherwise strange bedfellows became powerfully connected. And obviously, we're still living in the aftermath of that.
Okay. I know we're running a little short on time here, so maybe just one or two more questions. We have one up here in the front.
I see what you're saying about anecdotal evidence about people we know that have changed their minds and given up religion, and there are all kinds of stories about it out there. But what I'm wondering is it possible that this innate thing that we've acquired, like people who can't give up junk food or people that get addicted to other things, is just so powerful in most of the population that we aren't going to be able to suppress it enough, maybe even to save ourselves. Because if evolution and variety is the key there, maybe a couple of % of the human population is capable of giving it up entirely, and then maybe some more people are kind of in the middle. But what are the chances that for most of the population of the world, it's just going to be there, and reason is not going to be powerful enough to get rid of it, especially when some of the ideas now are about 10 to the 500 universes and dark matter and all of this stuff, and it'd be easy to say, well, why can't there be a God if there's something that ridiculous out there? So,
well, there are a couple things that make me hopeful. One is Western Europe, and Western Europe became secular even before this knowledge was available. And what is the crucial aspect that led Western Europe to become so secular? And a lot of people think it's the social safety net. They created a social safety net, and that people did not need to rely on their religions for communities, including communities that would particularly provide help to mothers and children. And the secularization of Europe may be one of the unexpected outgrowths of the Marshall Plan. And who's the largest non-governmental supplier of help? Who's the largest non-governmental supplier of aid to families in this country? Anybody know? The Mormon Church, right? And that so providing, I'm hopeful that if you provide a social safety net, we have plenty of evidence that seems to be one of the things that helps people move away from religion, and create communities that are non-religious, where they feel safe. And then the second thing that makes me hopeful is I think you can, we're never going to get completely rid of religion, but I think you can make religion sort of like smoking, something that smart people don't do. It's bad for your health. That it's really that it's bad for your health.
yeah,
And-
I guess but smokers aren't trying to get nukes either.
Smokers are what?
Trying to get nukes.
Yeah, but some of my analogies need work.
Well, when Trump is president, he's going to have the classiest social safety net you've ever seen. So it's just management. So,
Yeah.
All right,
all right, thank you.
We
thank
have,
you.
I think, one more question in the back there.
So one question I have is, what's your goal? Like, do you want to completely get rid of religion, or do you just want to make sure that there's critical thinking and no extremist groups?
I didn't hear the last part. The critical thinking
Do
one?
you just want to make sure that religion includes critical thinking so that there aren't extremist groups and terrorism? Or do you want to completely get rid of religion?
Completely what?
Get rid of religion.
Well, no, I think my wish would be that religion is divorced from politics, that at least in this country, we go back to being the secular republic we were supposed to be. So to get religion out of politics. And so that people are free to believe or not to believe. I think we'll always have some religions, but I basically want, I'd like religion defanged, let's put it that way. And I'd like people in your generation to have the opportunity to be openly secular, to not believe and to that have, and that have no negative consequence to you. I'm not concerned about my generation. My generation is really, you know, we're in the twilight of our lives. It's the next generations that I'm working for.
All right, thank you, Andy and Lisa.
Thank you all.